Good evening. Today we're going to be doing a little rundown on loudness, how to extract as much loudness out of tunes as we possibly can. So let's have a little listen to the tune that we're going to be working with, and we're going to get this little mini meters up, and we can see down here how many lofts that we're hitting. At the moment it's not enough, but we're going to go through how we can make it much louder. Let's have a little listen. Okay, right, so in that drop, barely hitting 10 laughs, which is not enough. And to preface, obviously you can get too much loudness out. The louder you get, the more you squash your dynamic range. So it's a bit push and pull. You don't want to go too hard, but there are ways that we can still make our tunes sound good dynamically, but still get more loudness out of it. So there's a few things that it took me a while to understand about loudness. And the way I would always try to get loudness out of my tunes, I would finish a whole production, so everything was there, kind of like it is now. And then I would, on the master chain, put some maximizers or limiters and stuff, and just try and push it as hard as I could. And I could never get them loud enough because they would just start distorting. The one thing that really helped me understand how to get loudness out of tunes is to start from the very beginning. And rather than build a tune and try to push the loudness up from, if I was down here like we are now at -10, and push it up, I would start from the beginning of the track and start at 0. So I'd make sure the loudest parts of my track are going to be 0. I know exactly where they're going to hit. So for example, this is a drum and bass tune. Our kick and our snare are going to be the loudest part of our tune. So we want them to be hitting about 0 dB from the very start. If you're doing house, it's probably going to be, your kick is going to be the one that's hitting 0. So let's ignore everything else that's in the tune for now. Let's just focus on the kick. So our kick, actually, because I already worked on this method at the start of making this tune, we're already almost hitting 0 dB. So we're -0.5, so we're just under 0 dB. So that's as loud as any other instrument in our track. And then our snare, at the moment, a little bit quiet. We can bump that up a little bit. So we're at 0.6. So as closest to 0 dB as we possibly can, because we know these are going to be the loudest parts of our track, and then everything beneath that is going to be quieter. So that helps us have like a bit of a North Star, because we know nothing else is going to be louder than that. So every other part of our track is going to be a little bit quieter, except maybe our sub. Our sub we can hit at 0 dB as well. And the way that we get around our kick, our snare, and our sub hitting all at 0 dB at the same time is by sidechaining. So we don't run into any problems with our kick and our snare hitting 0 dB, because they very rarely are hitting at the same time. So if you have something that's playing at 0 dB and then something else playing on top of that, it goes over 0 dB. When the kick and the snare are not playing at the same time, it makes it much easier. If we want our sub to be at 0 dB, which I think in bass music, you kind of want that to be one of the loudest parts of the track, sidechaining our sub to the kick and to the snare is a good way of having those three elements hitting 0 dB but not fighting each other. So they're all able to exist at 0 dB and not ever go over. So if we look at an oscilloscope, so we can see exactly what's happening with the waveforms of our kick and snare. So when it comes to getting loudness, we have to look at the loudest elements of our track, in this case being the kick and the snare. So we can see at the top here, this is 0 dB, and our kick and our snare are just hitting just under that. And the way that we can get even more loudness out of our track is by chopping off these transients, so the loudest parts of these instruments. So we can chop these little peaks off at the top. So it means when we go to the mastering channel of our track, we can push a clipper much, much louder. So if we look at the full track through an oscilloscope, you can see the loudest parts by far are the kick and the snare. And then this is our bass here, and then we've got all the little bits around that. So those are by far the loudest parts. And if we tame the loudest parts, it means we can push everything else much louder. So for example, what we can do on our kick, we can put a clipper. This is G-Clip. This is a free plugin I'd highly recommend. So let's have a look on the oscilloscope while we put this clip on. So this is with nothing. And then when we start to clip it, you can see the tops of these are being shaved off. And you do it even more, you could take it right down. Obviously that's way too much. So we want to start clipping to a point where you can barely hear that anything is being done. So you've got to use your ears for this. So you clip it effectively as much as you can without any audible change happening. So let's try that. So maybe about there. I would always say after you've sort of got to the point where you think it's not making any difference, then just ease off just a little bit. So maybe 10%. So we've really clipped this from 0 dB all the way down to almost -6. So if we turn that clipper on and off, you can actually barely hear any audible change in the perceived volume. So the perceived volume being how your ears hear the loudness. So without a clipper and with, almost no difference, but you can see that we've actually shaved off a lot. So let's do the same thing for our snare. So let's put a clipper on that. But actually, instead of clipping, what we can do is we can EQ into the clipper. So one way of getting more volume from the clipper is by taking this clip down, or we can increase the gain into the clipper. And one way we can do that is by using this plugin. So we literally just increase the gain. Or we can EQ into the clipper. So we can increase the amplitude of certain frequencies into that clip. So we can do something like this. If we turn that off and on, when it's on, it's audibly louder. But because we've got the clipper on, it's always clipping it at 0 dB. So we're never actually going over 0 dB. So it means the loudness of the sound doesn't ever actually get louder, but the perceived loudness does increase. So that's how we extract more perceived loudness out of that tune, is by doing something like EQing into the clipper or increasing the gain into the clipper. So now it means we've got our perceived loudness of our drums nice and loud. And if we look at Shaperbox here, we can see compared to what we last looked at, our bass feels much louder. And then if we put another clipper onto our master chain, so again, on our master chain, we're only hitting 0 dB. So our clipper effectively means that regardless of how loud any of our individual parts are, the master is never going over 0 dB. So we can now start to push, because we've clipped off the transients of those drums with those clippers, we can start to push the gain of the clipper much harder because we've taken those top notches down a little bit. So let's put this clipper on the gain up just a little bit. So now you can see the difference between our kick here and our bass. There's not such a massive difference, whereas before this bass looked much, much quieter. So it's like almost hitting half of that. So it's maybe like minus 12 dB. Now it's hitting -6. So because we've chopped off the transients of our drums up here, it means we can push everything else up much more. So if we now look at our loft meter on millimeters, we've gone from like -12 to -7-ish. And I think we can push that even more. So if we push the gain of our clipper even further, so once we get here, we can start to hear a lot of harmonic distortion coming in. It starts to sound a little bit too squashed. So let's just ease off that just a little bit. So now you can see we're hitting sort of -3, 4, 5. So we're getting much more loudness out of that. And effectively, the only way that we can do that is by doing all this clipping beforehand. So we're shaving off those transients before we get to the master. And what we could even do is we could put another clipper on our drum bus. So again, let's look at Shaperbox. Before we have this clipper on the drum bus, and then we take the gain up just a little bit. So you obviously don't want to do it too much because it really destroys the sound, but push it as much as you can without it really adding any harmonic information. So we've taken those transients out even more, and then on our master bus we can try push that even further now. So now you can see we're going from sort of -2 and -5, that sort of range, which is super loud, and you don't even need it to be that loud, if I'm honest. But if you did want to make your tunes that loud, that's sort of how you do it. And you can do a similar sort of thing on your bass channel. So I wouldn't necessarily put a clipper on your bass channel, but maybe a limiter. And again, on your limiter on your bass, what I would do is put this 1 on 1 and then just push it. So you're getting a little bit reduction and not too much. And the reason I do this 1 on 1 is because otherwise it changes the loudness of the sound. So this 1 on 1 means that you limit it without actually changing the loudness. If you've already got the volume sort of in check, doing that 1 on 1 means that you don't actually change the loudness, you just clip off the top, which makes it super easy. So we've clipped off those top bits of the transients of the bass, and on the individual parts of the kick and the snare and the whole of the drum group, and then on the main as well. So you don't have all of those peaks that are standing out too much. So it means that you can really push that G clip or that limiter or whatever you have on that master, you can just push it much more. Personally, I would think that's a little bit too much. I wouldn't keep it this hard. I think you're starting, especially with a kick, to make it crunch a little bit too much. But it's a stylistic choice, and if you wanted to do that, you definitely could. And that's something that I've seen Skrillex has done a few YouTube videos where you can see his layout, and he will quite often do group limiting. So he'll limit all of the groups of his drums, his synths, his basses, his vocals. He'll limit them all before they go into the master. So he shaves off those transients at the top, and then it means once you get into that master, you can push it much harder because you've not got those really loud peaks that this clipper or the limiter has to deal with at the end of your chain. So hopefully that makes sense. I hope it's helped, I really do. Please do subscribe. Thank you for watching, and love to your mothers.